The red wine bled into the crisp white uniform, before Grace even felt the cold liquid seeping through to her skin. The woman in the navy blue designer dress took a calculated step back, her hand still clutching the empty crystal stemware, while her lips formed an oops that carried absolutely zero trace of genuine regret. How clumsy of me. Grace didn't answer. She took the service napkin folded over her arm and began blotting the soaked fabric, her eyes fixed on the polished marble floor to hide the humiliation burning in her cheeks. All around them, the conversations continued to flow, as if the incident had never happened. Polite, discreet laughter, sideways glances loaded with silent judgment. A teenager in expensive heels brushed past her without even swerving, treating Grace as if she were merely part of the decorative furniture in the grand hall. The birthday party occupied the entire main floor of the sprawling estate. Tables covered in white linen, floral arrangements that cost more than Grace's monthly rent, and servers circulating with shimmering silver trays. She was just another one of them, invisible until she was necessary, or until, supposedly, she made an unforgivable mistake. On the other side of the room, leaning against the French doors that opened out to the manicured garden, James was watching the scene. 12 years old today. His jaw was tight, clenched with force. The fists balled at his sides betrayed his internal state, and something very deep inside him was about to explode violently. 3 months earlier, Grace had knocked on that same heavy front door, her hand trembling slightly from nerves. The mansion looked even more gigantic up close. 2 stories of modern architecture blending glass and stone, a lawn that stretched as far as the eye could see, and an automated gate that had taken 10 eternal seconds to open after she pressed the intercom. She adjusted her blouse for the 4th time and waited, trying to control her breathing. The massive front door swung open. The man who appeared was wearing a dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, sporting deep, dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights. He was 40-something, perhaps. His dark hair was beginning to show threads of silver at the temples, giving him an air of chronic exhaustion. He looked at her the way one checks off another item on an endless to-do list. "Grace Turner?" "Yes, sir." "James Sterling, come in." He didn't extend his hand to shake hers. He simply turned around and began walking down the wide hallway, expecting her to follow without questions. Grace closed the door carefully and trailed behind him, her worn sneakers making a soft, rhythmic sound against the light oak flooring. "Have you worked as a nanny before?" His voice echoed in the empty space, bouncing off the bare walls. "Yes, with 3 families over the last 5 years. I have verifiable references." "Can you cook?" "Yes, I can hold my own." "Drive?" "No, sir." He stopped dead in his tracks and turned for the first time, his brow furrowed in disapproval. "That's going to be a problem. Ethan has extracurricular activities. I can accompany him on public transit. Or you could keep the driver for those specific situations." James studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment, then continued walking. They entered a massive living room with minimalist furniture, everything decorated in a palette of cold greys and stark whites. It looked like a photograph from an architectural digest. It looked completely void of life. "Ethan is 12. He lost his mother 2 years ago. Since then he doesn't talk much, not to strangers, sometimes not even to me." James's voice had hardened on the last sentence, as if admitting it caused him physical pain. Grace waited for a more detailed explanation, but he didn't continue. He simply picked up a remote control and turned on the sound system, only to turn it off immediately, as if he had forgotten what he intended to do with it. "We've already had 4 nannies. None lasted more than 2 months. He systematically ignores them until they quit. Why do you think that happens?" James looked at her, genuinely surprised by the directness of the question. "Because he doesn't want another person trying to replace his mother." "Then I won't try." Absolute silence in the room. "The salary is what was listed in the ad," James said, recovering his strictly professional tone. "Business hours, Monday to Friday. Occasionally weekends if something comes up. Would you sleep here?" If it was strictly necessary, yes. It isn't. Can you start this Monday? Grace blinked, confused by the speed of the exchange. Have I been hired? I need someone urgently. You need the job. Let's do a 1-month trial. He was already walking toward the exit of the room when a voice cut through the hallway from the second floor. Dad! James stopped cold. A boy appeared at the top of the stairs. He was thin, with messy hair falling over his eyes and large headphones hanging around his neck. He looked at Grace with an expression that was completely neutral, devoid of any curiosity. "Ethan, this is Grace. She's going to start working here on Monday." The boy answered absolutely nothing. He simply walked down 3 steps, grabbed a bottle of water that was sitting on a console table, and went back up, without looking back a single time. The door to his bedroom slammed on the floor above. James sighed heavily. "Welcome to the family. Monday, 7 o'clock in the morning sharp." Grace entered through the service entrance, exactly as James had instructed. The kitchen was too clean, impersonal, as if no one really cooked there, looking more like a laboratory than a home. There was a list magnet clipped to the stainless steel refrigerator with schedules, emergency numbers, allergies, none, and very basic food preferences. The handwriting was rushed, almost illegible, scrawled by someone who had no time to spare. James appeared at 7:15, already dressed in an impeccable suit, his cell phone glued to his hand. He wakes up at 8. Breakfast is in that pantry, the stuff he usually eats. Classes start at 9. The school van picks him up at the gate at 8:40. I return at 7 p.m. For any problems, my number is on the list. Understood. He hesitated a second in the doorway, as if he were going to add something else, but finally just nodded and rushed out. The sound of his car engine faded beyond the electric gate. Grace remained completely alone in that immense house. At 8:05, she went up to Ethan's room and knocked lightly on the door. Nothing. She knocked again with a bit more insistence. "Ethan, breakfast will be ready in 10 minutes. Sepulchral silence on the other side. She went down and set the table with care. Cereal, cold milk, chopped fruit, freshly squeezed orange juice. At 8:20, Ethan came down with his backpack already on one shoulder, showing the same empty, distant look as the day before. He grabbed an apple from the bowl, took a half-hearted bite, and headed straight for the front door. "Aren't you going to sit down?" He stopped but didn't turn to look at her. "I'm not hungry." The front door closed behind him. Grace looked at the perfectly set table, the empty chair, the breakfast no one was going to touch. She took a deep breath so as not to get discouraged. Then she began to put everything away. That night, when Ethan returned from school, she had made lasagna. It wasn't on the list of instructions. But there was an old photo on the fridge, held up by a magnet, of a woman smiling while holding a steaming glass baking dish. The same dish Grace had found in the lower cabinet of the kitchen. Ethan walked into the kitchen and froze dead in his tracks upon catching the aroma. The smell of homemade food had taken over the entire house, filling the empty spaces. He looked at the oven, then at Grace, and back at the oven. "How did you—" "I saw the photo," Grace said simply. "I thought maybe you'd like it." Ethan stood paralyzed in the middle of the kitchen, his backpack still on his shoulders, his hands gripping the straps tightly. For the first time, Grace saw something different cross his face, a crack in his armor. He dragged the chair out slowly and sat down, and for the first time in 3 months, someone actually ate dinner with appetite and feeling in that house. Grace woke up at 5 in the morning every day. The cell phone alarm rang in the dark, and she got up before her mind could start to complain. Her rented room measured barely 10 by 8 feet, a twin bed, an old wardrobe that didn't close right, and a tiny sink in the corner. The bathroom was shared with 5 other tenants down the hall of the boarding house. She took a quick shower, almost always with cold water because the hot water tank ran out early, and left at 5:40 to catch the first bus. 40 minutes to downtown. Then another 25 on the train and a second bus to the exclusive residential neighborhood where James lived. She always arrived 15 minutes before 7. She waited standing outside the gate until her watch marked the exact hour. Not because James demanded it, but because she didn't want to give even the slightest reason to be fired. Before this job, she had spent 3 months unemployed and desperate. Before that, 6 months caring for an elderly lady with Alzheimer's who had died peacefully in her sleep. Before, a 1.5 years with a family that moved overseas and decided not to take her with them. It was always like this, everything temporary, everything disposable. There was a photo Grace kept like a treasure in her wallet, her and Ryan on their wedding day at the courthouse, without a lavish party, with no guests other than the mandatory witnesses. He was wearing the dress shirt she had ironed 3 times until it was perfect. She was wearing a simple white dress she had found on a clearance rack. They were smiling with a happiness as big as if they had won the lottery. 5 years later, Ryan was coming home from work on his bike when a delivery truck ran a red light. She had received the news by phone in the middle of an exhausting shift as a telemarketer. She remembered the sound of the headset hitting the floor. She remembered her co-workers staring at her. She didn't remember how she had managed to get to the hospital. The apartment where they lived was a rental. Without his paycheck, she couldn't make the rent. She lost everything in the span of 6 months. The home, the furniture, the feeling of having her own place in the world. She sold what she could to survive. She donated the rest. She kept only the photo and her wedding band. It had already been 3 years. Sometimes it felt like a lifetime ago. Sometimes it felt like it happened yesterday. James never spoke about his wife. Grace had noticed it from the first week. There were photos around the house. In the hallway, in the den, in Ethan's room, but none in the main living room, none in James's home office. It was as if he had strategically chosen the places where he didn't need to meet her gaze. One afternoon, while dusting the bookshelves in the living room, Grace found a box in the lower cabinet. Inside were wedding albums, certificates, important documents, and more photos. Everything organized, stored, sealed shut. She put everything back exactly as it was, respecting that silent grief. James came home at 7, sometimes 8. He entered through the door, already checking emails on his phone, his tie loosened and his shoulders slumped under the weight of a day that seemed to have no end. He asked mechanically how Ethan's day had been. Grace answered. He thanked her and went straight up to change clothes. The first week she left dinner ready and went home. The second, she realized James wasn't eating. He would just heat something up very late at night, eat standing in the kitchen, and go back to his office to answer emails until dawn. She started leaving smaller portions, easier to heat up, with sticky notes indicating how many minutes to put them in the microwave. He never made a single comment, but the containers came back empty the next morning. One night, 3 weeks after Grace started working there, James came down to the kitchen and found her still putting things away. I thought you had already left. The last bus passes at 8:30. I still have 20 minutes. He stood frozen in the entryway, as if he didn't know whether to enter his own kitchen or leave. Finally, he dragged out a chair and sat down, visibly exhausted. Did Ethan eat? He ate. He even had seconds. James looked at the empty table, fixing his gaze on his own hands resting on the wood. He's different. Grace didn't answer immediately. She just waited for him to continue. He used to laugh before. James continued, his voice lower and raspier. Before Lily died, he was loud. He joked around all the time. He had friends over every week. After the funeral, it was like a switch was flipped off, and I didn't know how to turn it back on. Did you try? The question came out harder than Grace intended. James looked up, surprised by the challenge. I tried. God knows I tried. But every time I looked at him, I saw her, and it hurt so much that I ran. I buried myself in work. I traveled. I let other people handle it. And the more time passed, the harder it became to come back. A heavy silence fell between them. Grace picked up her bag and checked the time on her watch. He doesn't need you to replace his mother. He just needs you to be here, present. James didn't answer. But when she walked out the service door, he was still sitting in the kitchen, staring at the empty spot in front of him. Ethan spent his weekends hermetically sealed in his room. Grace found that out by chance, when James mentioned during the week that the boy didn't even come out to eat when she wasn't there. Saturday and Sunday were 2 days of absolute oppressive silence in that house. She thought about that during the bus ride back, that Friday. She thought about the tiny room where she herself spent weekends completely alone. She thought about how loneliness felt different when you were surrounded by so much empty, luxurious space. The following Monday, when Ethan came down for breakfast, she was making hot pancakes. He stopped in the doorway. "You didn't make these before." "I thought it was time to vary the menu a little." Ethan sat down slowly, watching with curiosity as she stacked 3 golden discs on his plate. Honey, fresh strawberries, a pat of butter melting slowly on top. He ate in silence, but he ate absolutely everything. And when he finished, he stayed seated for 5 more minutes, simply because there, in that kitchen, it didn't seem as empty as the rest of the massive estate. It was in the 5th week that Grace found Ethan in the house library. She was looking for a cookbook James had mentioned when she heard a noise coming from the 2nd level of shelves. She walked up slowly and found the door ajar. Ethan was sitting on the floor, surrounded by open books, with a cell phone flashlight illuminating the pages. "Did the bulb burn out?" Grace asked from the doorframe. He looked up, startled, and turned off the flashlight too quickly, as if he'd been caught doing something wrong. "No, I was just reading." Grace walked in and looked at the books scattered on the rug. All about astronomy, constellations, distant solar systems, star charts with notes made in pencil in the margins. "Do you like the stars?" Ethan shrugged, defensive, but didn't deny it. "My mom liked them. We used to go up to the roof deck and she'd teach me the names: Big Dipper, Orion, Cassiopeia." His voice became a whisper on the last word. Grace sat on the floor next to him, naturally, and picked up one of the large volumes. "I know almost nothing about this. Ryan, my husband, he used to say all stars looked the same. I just agreed with him so we wouldn't argue." Ethan sketched a half-smile, shy. "They aren't the same. Each one has a different color, a different size, a different age. Some died a long time ago, but we still see their light. How is that possible? The light takes so long to travel here that, when we look at the sky, we're actually looking at the past." Grace stayed quiet, processing the idea. "So it's like looking at an old photograph?" "Yeah, kind of." They sat on the floor for 20 more minutes, Ethan showing her the maps and explaining with an animation and a light in his eyes that Grace had never seen in him. When she stood up to go do her chores, he was still flipping through the books with enthusiasm. The next day, Grace showed up with a hardcover book under her arm. It was used, bought at a second-hand bookstore, but it was in good condition. Atlas of the Constellations for Beginners. Ethan took the book delicately, as if it were fragile glass. "You bought this? I thought it might be useful. For both of us. You teach me, and I learn." He opened it to the first page, ran his fingers over the detailed illustration of the Milky Way. He didn't say anything, but when he looked up at Grace, he was smiling genuinely. The afternoons began to have a new, welcoming routine. Ethan came home from school at 3:30. Quick snack in the kitchen, always something Grace had prepared with care. A sandwich, a slice of cake, fresh fruit. Then he did his homework at the living room table while she did housework nearby, keeping him company. At first, he did everything in absolute silence, but little by little, he started asking questions. "Grace, what's 7 times 13? "I have no idea. Use the calculator." "The teacher said we have to do it in our heads." "Then you're going to have to figure it out all by yourself. I was always a disaster at math." Ethan let out a laugh. It was a low sound, almost stifled, but it was there, alive. A week later, he was stuck on an essay about, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" He sat staring at the blank sheet for 15 frustrating minutes before throwing his pen on the table. "I don't know what to write." Grace was folding clean towels on the nearby sofa. "What's the topic?" "About what I want to be. And I don't know." "What do you like to do?" "Read about stars. But nobody makes a living looking at the sky." Grace stopped her hands mid-fold. "Astronomers make a living from it. Scientists, university professors. There are people who work at NASA." Ethan looked at her with wide eyes, as if he had never considered that a real possibility. "Do you think I could?" "I think you can be whatever you want. You just need to want it enough." He went back to focusing on his essay. This time, the pen didn't stop moving across the paper. James started coming home earlier. First, it was only 15 minutes early, then half an hour. For a whole week, he was home at 6:30, sometimes even at 6. He always arrived with the same casual excuse. A cancelled meeting, traffic was lighter, he left the office early. But Grace perceived the truth behind the excuses. He wanted to be there. One evening, James came down and found Ethan and Grace in the kitchen in full swing. She was teaching the boy how to make risotto, and the two were laughing because Ethan had put in too much salt and they were trying to save the culinary disaster. "Add more broth," Grace was saying. "Dilute it. It's going to get watery. Better watery than inedible because it's so salty." James stood frozen in the doorway, observing the scene with fascination. Ethan was the first to notice his presence. "Dad, want a taste?" James blinked, surprised by the invitation. "What?" "The risotto. It's kinda bad, but we're fixing it." Sure." He walked into the kitchen, took the spoon Ethan offered, and tasted cautiously. He made an inevitable face. "Way too much salt." Ethan burst out laughing. "I know. I told Grace I messed up." "You were the one who poured it," Grace countered, but she was smiling amused. James grabbed another spoon and walked over to the stove. "Let me see. How much broth have you guys put in already?" And suddenly there were 3 people around the stove, trying to save a risotto that was probably a lost cause, but no one wanted to give up. When they finally sat down to eat, the rice was overcooked and still a little salty, but all 3 of them went back for seconds. At the end of the 6th week, James called Grace into his office before she left. She walked in slowly, not knowing what to expect. He was behind his large mahogany desk, but stood up as soon as she appeared. "Sit down, please." Grace sat on the edge of the chair. Her heart was racing. "I just wanted to say that Ethan is different. Better. He talks about you. He asks when you're going to arrive. Yesterday he showed me the essay he wrote on astronomy. He got an A. He's very intelligent. He just needed someone to listen." James nodded, looking at his own hands on the desk. "You do much more than listen. You are bringing him back to life, and I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't have to thank me. It's my job." "No, it isn't." James's voice came out firm and sure. "Your job is to watch him during business hours. The rest is you choosing to be present, choosing to care, and that makes all the difference." Grace didn't know what to answer. She just sat there looking at James, seeing something in his face that wasn't there before, something less tired, less lost in grief. "I've raised your salary," he said, breaking the silence. 20% more, retroactive from your first day. You deserve it." "James, you don't have to." "I need to, and I want to." He extended a white envelope. Grace took it, not daring to open it there. "Thank you." "Thank you." When she walked out of the office, Ethan was sitting at the top of the stairs, waiting anxiously. "Did he fire you?" Grace let out a laugh of relief. "No." "Why do you think that?" "Because you were taking a long time, and he always fires the others fast." "It wasn't a firing, it was the complete opposite." Ethan ran down the stairs and stopped right in front of her. "So you're going to stay?" Grace looked at the boy, at his eyes full of fragile hope, at the shy smile he was trying to hide. She thought about how empty of soul that house had been the first time she entered, and how now there was laughter echoing off the walls. There was conversation. There was light. "I'm going to stay." Ethan hugged her. It was a quick hug, almost awkward, but it was real and sincere. And for the first time in 3 long years, Grace felt she had found a place where she belonged. Things changed slowly, but they changed for real. Grace started arriving at 6:30, not 7 o'clock sharp. Not because James asked her to, but because Ethan had mentioned that he woke up too early and stayed alone until she arrived. Now when he came down at 7, there was already the smell of fresh coffee and sometimes hot pancakes waiting. "Good morning. Good morning, Grace." Small words that became a sacred ritual. Ethan started sitting at the table to eat breakfast calmly. At first, he ate fast and ran out. Then he started staying longer. He talked about the math test, about the kid at school who made a stupid joke in class, about the science teacher who talked too fast and nobody understood. Grace listened attentively while doing the dishes, asked questions, laughed at his stories, and Ethan realized that someone really cared about his answers. One morning, James came down earlier than usual and found the two of them at the table. Ethan was showing him a detailed drawing of a constellation he had made. "This one here is Andromeda. It has a whole galaxy inside it." Grace was studying the paper, genuinely impressed. "You drew this?" "I copied it from the book. But I improved some parts." James poured himself coffee and sat with them, something he hadn't done for 2 years. Ethan paused, surprised by his father's presence, but then continued explaining. "And here, Dad, this is the Orion Nebula. You can see it with binoculars if the sky is clear." "Really? Really? We could try it someday." James looked at his son, looked at the drawing, and looked back at his son in the eyes. "I'd like that very much." Ethan smiled. And in that moment, with the morning sun coming through the window and the coffee still steaming in the cups, the kitchen seemed smaller, cozier. It seemed like a home. Grace started teaching Ethan to cook for real. Not complicated chef recipes, but the basics for life. How to make rice that doesn't stick, how to season chicken properly, how to know when pasta is al dente. "Why do I need to know this?" Ethan asked the first time, holding the wooden spoon as if it were an alien artifact. "Because one day you're going to live alone, and you won't want to live on takeout. I can hire someone." Grace looked at him, arching an eyebrow skeptically. "You can. Or you can learn to fend for yourself." Ethan grumbled a little, but he stayed. And on the 3rd attempt at making beef stew, he was already stirring the sauce without anyone telling him to. "It's getting good," he said, tasting with the tip of the spoon. "It is. You've got the touch." "You think?" "I believe so." Ethan smiled at the pot, proud of something he had created with his own hands. When James arrived that night, Ethan practically dragged him to the kitchen. "I made dinner. Alone. Well, almost alone. Grace helped me, but I did the main part." James tasted the dish, his eyes widening in amazement. "You made this?" "I did. It's excellent." Ethan beamed with pride. And during dinner, all three sitting at the table, James talked about a difficult meeting he'd had at work. Nothing too detailed, nothing too heavy, but enough to include the other two in his daily life. Ethan asked if his dad had won the argument. Grace asked if he had eaten lunch. "I forgot," James admitted. "Again?" Grace crossed her arms in a sign of reproach. "I was very busy. I'm going to start sending Tupperware to your office. There's no need." "It's not about need. It's about preventing you from fainting in the middle of an important board meeting." Ethan laughed. James tried to keep a straight face, but couldn't hide a smile that escaped him. "All right, you win." The weekends stopped being silent and lonely. Grace started showing up on Saturdays. Not officially, they didn't pay her for it, but Ethan had mentioned a school science project, and she had offered her help. James opened the door, visibly surprised. "You don't work on Saturdays?" "I know, but the project is for Monday, and I promised to help him." James opened the door fully to let her pass. "At least stay for lunch." She stayed, and in some mysterious way, that Saturday became the usual pattern. Grace would appear in the morning, help Ethan with whatever he needed, and end up staying until the afternoon. James started preparing lunches. Clumsy attempts at first, but improving with practice and time. One Saturday, Ethan suggested they go up to the roof deck after lunch. The terrace was enormous, with a panoramic view of the skyline. There was outdoor furniture covered by tarps and plants that no one had tended to in years. Ethan went straight to a corner where there was a low table. "Mom and I used to sit here," he said, his voice very low. "She would bring hot chocolate, and we'd stay until it got dark." Grace and James exchanged a look loaded with emotion. Neither of them knew what to say in that sacred moment. Ethan wiped the dust off the table with his hand. "I wanted to show you guys. When it's dark, you can see everything." "Everything what?" Grace asked gently. "The stars." So they stayed. James brought chairs from downstairs. Grace improvised snacks in the kitchen, and when the sun began to go down, painting the sky orange, the three of them were sitting on the terrace, waiting. Ethan had brought the book Grace gave him. When the first light appeared in the sky, he pointed to it. "That one is Venus. Technically it's not a star, it's a planet. But it shines brighter than anything else in the sky right now." "How do you know that?" James asked, impressed. "I read a lot, and Mom taught me." Silence. But it wasn't an awkward silence. It was the kind of silence that opens space for memories without them hurting when touched. More stars appeared one after another. Ethan went on naming each one, telling stories about Greek mythology, about impossible distances to imagine, about light that traveled years just to arrive there. Grace listened fascinated. James listened to his son, really listened to him, for the first time in a long time. When Ethan paused to breathe, James placed his hand on his shoulder tenderly. "Your mother would be very proud of you." Ethan looked at his father, his eyes shining even in the darkness of the night. "You think?" "I'm absolutely certain." Ethan leaned against his father just for a second, but it was enough. And Grace, sitting on the other side, felt something tighten in her chest. It wasn't pain, it was something different. It was seeing two people she loved, and yes, she loved them, she realized suddenly, finding their way back to each other. The following weeks were the best that house had seen in years. James started working from home on Fridays. Ethan stopped eating alone, locked in his room. Grace started leaving notes in Ethan's lunchbox. Bad jokes, drawings of stars, reminders that someone was thinking of him. One evening, while Grace was putting away groceries, James came into the kitchen. "I need to ask you a favor." "Sure, tell me." "I have a business trip next week, 3 days. Could you stay here with Ethan?" Grace stopped putting away jars. "Sleep here?" "I know it's not in your contract. I'll pay overtime. It's just that he's still a child, and I don't feel comfortable leaving him alone, even with the housekeeper coming during the day." "No need to pay extra," Grace said firmly. "I'll stay." James relaxed visibly, exhaling. "Thank you, really. You have no idea how much this means to me." "Yes, I do. I know exactly what it means." He studied her for a moment, something changing in his expression, becoming softer. "You care about him. For real. I care a lot. And that's rare. The other nannies did their job and left. You stay. You care. You—" He stopped, looking for the right words. "You brought life back to this house." Grace felt her face heat up. "I just do my job." "No, you do much more than that." The silence stretched between them, charged with something electric that neither of them was ready to name yet. James opened his mouth to say something else, but Ethan yelled from upstairs, "Grace, can you help me with something?" The magic moment broke. Grace nodded to James and went up the stairs in a hurry, but when she looked back, he was still there, watching her go up. And for the first time, she wondered if that house was becoming something more than just a workplace. The call came on a Tuesday night. James was in his home office when the phone rang. Grace heard his voice change from downstairs, the professional tone giving way to something tense, defensive, and annoyed. "It's none of your business, Aunt Victoria." Long pause. "She works here. She's Ethan's nanny." Another pause, this one longer and heavier. "That's ridiculous." The voice got louder. Ethan looked up from his homework, furrowing his brow with worry. Grace signaled for him to keep writing. but she was listening to every word intently. When James came down 20 minutes later, his face was closed off and somber. "Everything okay?" Grace asked cautiously. "My aunt. She heard rumors that there is a new employee here. She wants to meet you at Ethan's birthday party." Something in the way he pronounced employee made Grace's stomach knot. "I didn't know there was going to be a party." James ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I didn't want one, but Victoria insisted. She always insists and gets what she wants." Ethan had stopped pretending to do homework. "I don't want a party, Dad." "I know, son, but it's a family tradition every year since you were born, except the last 2 years. Exactly why she wants to do it now, to get back to normal." Normal. The word hung in the air like a silent accusation. The following week was strange and tense. James spent more time at the office again. He arrived late. He left early. When he was home, he seemed distracted, distant, as if he had gone back 3 months in time. Ethan noticed immediately. "He's weird again." Grace was making his snack. He's stressed with the party planning. He wasn't stressed before, not until Aunt Victoria called. She had no answer for that. On Thursday, 2 days before the big party, a package arrived. The housekeeper who came to do the deep cleaning handed it to Grace. Inside was a uniform, black skirt, starched white blouse, apron. There was a note attached. "For the party. Victoria insisted that all staff be properly uniformed. Sorry. J." Grace looked at the uniform for a long time, feeling a lump in her throat. Then she folded everything back into the box with care and put it in the back of the closet. James called her into his office that night. She entered and closed the door behind her. He was standing in front of the window, back to her. "You got the package." "I got it." Awkward silence. "Victoria is bringing her own staff. Caterers, servers, an event planner. She wants you to help as part of the service team." Grace didn't answer. James turned, finally facing her. "I know how this sounds. It sounds like you're asking me to pretend I'm invisible. That's not it. It is exactly that." Her voice came out firmer than she expected. "You want me to wear a uniform, to serve guests, to stay in my place as the help. It's just one night, Grace. After this, everything goes back to normal." "Normal for who?" James closed his eyes, defeated. "My aunt is complicated. She has very strong opinions on how I raise Ethan, on how I run the house, on everything. And she has a lot of influence with the company board. One wrong comment from her could what? Cost you money, cost you your reputation. It could cost everything." Grace crossed her arms over her chest. "Then what am I? What have we become these past months? Am I worth less than her opinion?" "It's not about worth." "It is exactly what it is about." The silence returned, heavy as molten lead. "Please," James said, and his voice sounded infinitely tired. "It's Ethan's birthday. I don't want to ruin it. After the party, we'll talk calmly. But now I need you to do this for me." Grace looked at him. She looked at the man who had changed so much in the last few weeks, who had returned to dinner with his son, who had smiled for real. And she saw that all that progress was fragile, superficial. At the first sign of social pressure, he reverted to being who he had always been, the boss. "Fine," she said, her voice void of emotion. "I'll wear the uniform. I'll serve the guests. I'll stay in my place." "And Grace, are you finished?" James opened his mouth to reply, but closed it. He nodded, ashamed. Grace walked out without looking back. Ethan found her in the dark hallway. "Were you crying?" "No." "Your eyes are red." Grace wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I'm tired, that's all." Ethan didn't believe her, but didn't push. He just stood there, still in the dim hallway, looking too small for that huge house. "I don't want this party," he whispered. "I know. Mom hated when Aunt Victoria came to visit. They always fought. My dad always stayed in the middle doing nothing." Grace looked at the boy, his eyes so similar to his father's. "Some people have more power than they should," she said gently, "and they use that power to make others feel small and insignificant. Is that what she's going to do to you? Grace didn't answer the direct question. Ethan stepped forward and hugged her tight. It was a strong, desperate hug, as if he were holding on to someone who was about to vanish into thin air. "Don't leave," he whispered against her clothes. "Please, don't be like the others." Grace hugged him back, her throat too tight to speak. The night before the party, Grace stayed in the room assigned to her, the room she had never really used, which had been prepared months ago when James offered for her to sleep there if needed. The uniform was hanging on the closet door. She looked at it for a long time. She seriously thought about not going. She thought about calling, inventing a sickness excuse, disappearing before the public humiliation arrived. It would be easier, more dignified for her. But then she thought about Ethan, about how he had asked her not to leave, about how he would search for her at the party, hoping to see a familiar and safe face amidst so many intimidating strangers. She picked up her cell phone, opened messages, started typing. "I won't be able to come tomorrow." Her finger hovered over the send button. 1 minute, 2 eternal minutes. Then she deleted the whole text. She put the phone away, looked at the uniform again with resignation, and made the only decision she could live with in peace. She was going to show up. She was going to wear the damn uniform. She was going to serve the rich guests, but she would do it for Ethan. Only and exclusively for him, because some people were worth any humiliation. And that boy was one of them. The hall was packed when Grace came down the service stairs. 50 people, maybe more. Designer dresses, tailored suits, jewelry that shone intensely under the crystal chandeliers. The event agency had transformed the house. Exotic white flowers in every corner, tables covered with fine linen tablecloths, a dessert table that looked straight out of a wedding magazine. Grace was wearing the uniform. The skirt was too tight at the waist, the blouse smelled faintly of mothballs. The white apron was spotless. She pulled her hair back into a tight bun and descended into the arena. No one looked at her. The kitchen was controlled chaos. 5 servers circulating frantically, 2 chefs finishing gourmet dishes, a woman with a clipboard shouting orders. Someone shoved a heavy tray into Grace's hands. "Salmon appetizers! Move!" Grace held the tray firmly and walked out into the living room. The first hour was bearable. She circulated in silence, offered the appetizers, collected empty glasses from tables. People took food without looking at her face, without saying thank you, as if the tray floated in the air by magic. Ethan was near the dessert table, surrounded by distant cousins he clearly didn't know and wasn't interested in. He was wearing a suit that was too small, leaving his wrists exposed, uncomfortable. When Grace passed near him, their gazes crossed for an instant. He opened his mouth as if to tell her something, but a tall woman in a red dress pulled him toward another group of people. Aunt Victoria. Grace recognized her from the photos in the hallway. 60-something platinum blonde hair styled in a very elaborate updo, posture erect like a queen inspecting her domain. She circulated through the party with an icy smile that didn't reach her eyes, touching arms, making sharp comments, controlling every aspect of the event. James was near the entrance, talking to men in dark suits. Business partners, probably. He held a glass of whiskey in his hand, but didn't drink a drop. He looked at Grace once. Just once, before averting his gaze quickly, ashamed. It was in the second hour that things got drastically worse. Grace was collecting empty plates when a woman in a navy blue dress called her by snapping her fingers. "You, bring more wine." "Yes, ma'am." Grace went back to the kitchen, grabbed a new bottle, and returned. The woman extended her glass without looking, talking animatedly to the friend next to her. Grace began to pour carefully. The woman moved her arm abruptly in the middle of an emphatic sentence. The wine spilled onto the pristine white tablecloth, onto the expensive navy blue dress, onto the marble floor. "What the—" The woman jumped back, watching with horror as the red stains spread across the fabric. "Are you blind?" "Excuse me, ma'am." "It was an accident. An accident. You just ruined a $3,000 dress." Conversations around them stopped dead. Heads turned toward the scandal. Grace felt 50 pairs of eyes pinned on her. "I'll clean it up. Don't touch me." The woman took a step back as if Grace were contagious. James, did you see this?" James crossed the room in long strides, his face tense from the situation. "Courtney, I am so sorry." "Being sorry isn't going to fix my dress. Where did you get this made? She clearly has no training whatsoever." Grace clutched the empty tray against her chest like a shield. She didn't look up. She didn't defend herself. She just stood there, invisible again in her humanity, while the woman continued screaming. "These people, James, you can't trust them in environments like this. It's embarrassing." "It was an accident," Grace said in a barely audible whisper. "Are you answering me back?" The woman turned to her, eyes wide with indignation. "You think you have the right to—" "Courtney, that's enough." James tried to intervene, but his voice came out weak without real conviction. Aunt Victoria appeared like a looming shadow. "Did something happen?" "This employee spilled wine on me." Victoria looked at Grace for the first time. A long, appraising look, cold as ice. "You're the new nanny." It wasn't a question. It was a dismissive statement. "Yes, ma'am." "Interesting." Victoria turned to James. "You didn't tell me she was so young and pretty." The tone carried a deadly poison disguised as sweetness. "She is competent," James said, but his voice sounded too defensive. "I'm sure she is." Victoria smiled maliciously. "But perhaps it's better she returns to the kitchen. Let's leave the service to the real professionals." It was a direct order, not a suggestion. Grace nodded, swallowing her pride, and began to turn to leave. "Wait!" The voice came from behind, clear and powerful. Everyone turned. Ethan was standing in the middle of the room, fists clenched and face red with anger. He had heard everything. "Ethan, go back to the party," James said, trying to keep control. "No!" "Ethan, no!" His voice came out louder, echoing off the walls. The entire hall fell into a sepulchral silence. Victoria stepped forward condescendingly. "Sweetie, the adults are talking. I don't care." Ethan started walking straight toward Grace. "You guys can't talk to her like that." "She's just a maid, Ethan," said the woman in the stained dress, rolling her eyes with annoyance. "She isn't just anything." Ethan stopped in front of Grace. She saw tears gathering in the boy's eyes, but he didn't let them fall. "She is the person who takes care of me when I'm sad. She is the one who taught me to cook. She is the one who listens to me when no one else listens to me in this house. She is the one who makes this place feel like a home again." His voice trembled with contained emotion. "She is my mom." Absolute silence. No one dared to breathe. Grace felt tears burning her eyes, fighting not to cry. Ethan turned to the room, facing all those people watching. "And if you guys can't respect her, then you don't respect me." Victoria went pale beneath her makeup. "Ethan, you don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying." James stood motionless, frozen, looking at his son with a revelation hitting his chest. Something broke in his face, something that had been repressed and chained for years. He crossed the room in 3 long, decided strides. He stood next to Ethan, next to Grace. "He's right," James said, and his voice came out firm and powerful for the first time all evening. "Grace isn't just some employee. She is family. And I was a coward for not making that clear from the beginning." Victoria took a step back, scandalized. "James, you are making a huge mistake." "The mistake was letting you dictate how I live my life, how I raise my son." He looked Courtney straight in the eyes. "Your dress will be replaced. You can send me the bill, but right now I need you to leave my house immediately." "Are you kicking me out?" "I am kicking you out." Courtney let out an incredulous laugh, grabbed her designer bag, and walked out, clicking her heels, slamming the door shut. Other guests started moving, uncomfortable, looking for their coats and bags. James turned to the rest of the room with authority. "Anyone else who has a problem with the way I live can leave with her." 10 people walked out murmuring. Then 5 more. Victoria stood still, face transformed into a mask of barely contained fury. "You're going to regret this, James." "Maybe. But at least I'll regret it having done the right thing." Victoria left without looking back, defeated. The room was left half empty, but the air felt lighter. Those who stayed were kinder faces, some cousins of James, some real friends who didn't judge. They went back to conversing in low voices, giving them space and privacy. James turned to Grace, his gaze full of remorse. "Forgive me for everything, for asking you to wear this humiliating uniform, for not defending you sooner, for being weak when you deserved for me to be strong." Grace couldn't articulate a word. She barely nodded, moved. Ethan hugged her, hard, trembling, crying freely now, and James hugged them both, closing the circle. There, in the middle of the luxury hall, surrounded by strangers, broken crystal, and spilled wine, finally, they looked like a real family. The following Monday, Grace didn't wear the uniform. She arrived at 6:30, as always, but this time she entered through the front door, head held high. James had insisted on that the night of the party, and she didn't argue because she knew it was the right thing. Small symbolic changes that meant everything. Ethan came down for breakfast, with eyes still a little puffy from sleep. He stopped when he saw the table set. Pancakes, fruit, fresh juice, the same as always. But something in the atmosphere was different. "Good morning, Mom." Grace froze with the coffee mug in her hand. She stared at him. "Can I call you that?" Ethan asked, suddenly unsure. "I mean, not in front of everyone if you don't want, but here at home." His voice faded into doubt. Grace set the mug on the table with extreme care. She walked over to him and held his face in her warm hands. "You can. You can call me whatever you want, sweetie." Ethan smiled. That bright smile that had disappeared for 2 years and was slowly coming back to his face. James appeared in the doorway at that precise moment. He saw the two embracing in the kitchen, with the golden morning light coming through the window. He didn't say anything so as not to interrupt. He simply took a mug of coffee and sat with them at the table. And for the first time in years, breakfast wasn't a rushed formality. It was slow, full of conversation, shared laughter, exciting plans for the day. Changes came slowly but constant, like the tide. James radically reorganized his work. He started working from home 3 days a week. He delegated important projects. He refused unnecessary trips he used to use to escape. For the first time in a decade, work wasn't the only thing that defined him as a man. Victoria called once. James hung up on her without hesitation. She didn't call again. 2 conservative partners stepped away from the company. 3 others stayed and said they respected his decision and his values. The business survived and prospered. James realized he had more control than he imagined. Grace moved into the guest room on the 2nd floor, a dignified and bright room, not officially, not with a formal announcement, but her things migrated little by little. Clothes in the large closet, books on the nightstand, a photo of Ryan on the dresser. James never asked her to remove it, respecting her past. One night, 3 weeks after the party, James knocked lightly on her door. "Can I come in?" Grace was reading, lying on the bed. She closed the book, marking the page. "Sure." He entered but stayed near the door, respectful, hands in pockets. "I wanted to ask you something important." "Go ahead." "Do you want to go back to school?" Grace blinked, confused by the change of subject. "How so?" "You mentioned once that you had quit college when Ryan died. Education degree, right?" Yes. But I had a 1.5 years left to finish, and I have no way to pay tuition now." "I'll pay it." Silence in the room. "James." "It's not charity, Grace. It's an investment. Ethan will need help with homework for the next few years. Better it be from someone professionally trained." He was smiling, trying to make his gesture seem less important and overwhelming than it was. Grace got up from the bed slowly. "Why are you doing this for me?" James took a step forward, getting closer. "Because you changed our lives, and I want to pay you back. I want you to have the things you deserve in your own right. I know you don't need it to survive, but what if I want to give it to you? What if it matters to me to see it happen?" His eyes were fixed on hers, intense. Something passed between them in that instant. Something that had been growing silently for months, but neither had the courage to name. "Okay," Grace said in a whisper. "I accept." James smiled. For real. This time with eyes shining. Good. He didn't leave immediately. He stood there, looking at her, hands still in pockets, hesitating. "Grace." "Yes?" "Nothing. Get some rest. Good night." But in the doorway, he stopped. "Look back one last time. I'm happy you're here." "I am too." Ethan began to bloom like a plant finally getting sunlight. His grades improved noticeably. He joined the school astronomy club with enthusiasm. He made real friends, 3 boys who showed up at the house on Friday afternoons to play video games and eat pizza until they burst. Grace prepared snacks. James played with them sometimes, losing miserably but laughing at himself just the same. One quiet afternoon, Grace was studying in the living room when Ethan sat next to her on the sofa. "Do you think my mom would have liked you?" The question caught her completely off guard. I don't know, honey. I hope so." Ethan sat still for a moment, thoughtful. "I think so. She wanted me to be happy. And I am, because of you." Grace closed her notebook. "Your mum loved you very much, and nothing I do will ever change that. I know, but there's room for both. Here in my heart, my teacher said love doesn't decrease when we share it. It only increases and multiplies." Grace hugged him tenderly. "Your teacher is a very wise woman." 6 months after the party, James took them both to the movies. Comedy movie, giant popcorn with extra butter, soda that Ethan spilled twice from excitement. On the way back, Ethan fell asleep in the back seat of the car. James drove slowly, in no hurry to arrive, savoring the moment. Grace looked out the window, the city passing by in blurred, colorful lights. "Are you happy?" James asked in a low voice so as not to wake Ethan. "I am." "Really?" She turned to look at him. "Really?" James reached for her hand over the gear shift. It was a quick, almost shy gesture. Grace interlaced her fingers with his naturally. And they stayed like that for the rest of the drive, connected. When they arrived home, James carried Ethan in his arms to his room. Grace went up behind, took the boy's shoes off, and covered him with the blanket gently. They stood frozen in the doorway for a moment, watching Ethan sleep in peace. "Thank you," James whispered. "For what?" "For saving us." Grace shook her head gently. "You saved yourselves. I just helped open the door." James took her hand again. This time he didn't let go. And they walked down the stairs together in a complicit silence, knowing something fundamental had changed between them. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden like in the movies, but it was real. And for the first time in years, neither of them felt fear of what would come next. 5 years later, Ethan was 17 now. He was tall, taller than James, with the same messy hair, but a newfound confidence in his posture. The college acceptance letter was stuck to the fridge, held by the same magnet holding the old photo of Lily with the lasagna. Astronomy. Full scholarship for academic excellence. He had done it. Grace was in the kitchen when he arrived from school that sunny afternoon. She had graduated 2 years ago, a small and emotional ceremony, but James and Ethan were in the front row, clapping louder than any other father or husband. "Mom, can I invite the guys over for dinner Friday?" She didn't even bat an eye anymore when he called her that. It had become something natural, organic, as it always should have been. "You can." "How many?" "About 6. We have to study for the physics final." "I'll make lasagna." Ethan smiled with nostalgia. "Grandma Lily's recipe." "That very one?" He grabbed an apple and bit into it loudly. "She would have loved you. I'm certain." Grace looked at him, almost a grown man now, but she could still see the 12-year-old boy who had eaten pancakes in silence that first difficult week. I would have loved to know her too. The charity had started small and modest. A rented room downtown, 3 donated computers, Grace and 2 more volunteers with a will to help. Fresh Start. The name had been Ethan's brilliant idea. They helped widows, single mothers, anyone who needed real support to return to the job market and reclaim their dignity. Free training courses, job placement, a solid emotional support network. James financed the whole project, but never insisted on putting his name on the plaque. "It's your project, my love," he told her. "It's your story that inspires." 3 years later, it was already 2 large halls. Then they moved to a small building of their own, 15 permanent employees, 200 women assisted and back on their feet per year. Grace came home exhausted, but her soul full of fulfillment. And James always had dinner ready. He had improved a lot in the kitchen, although he was still no rival for Grace's touch. The wedding had been discreet and elegant. City Hall, Ethan signing as proud witness, 2 close friends. No pompous party, no family drama, no obligation guests who didn't really matter. Just them and the immensity of what they felt. Ethan had cried with emotion. "I cried at my mom's wedding too," he said later, laughing while wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. "But this is in the good sense." Grace still wore Ryan's ring on her right hand. The new gold band shone on the left. James never asked her to take off the old one. He understood perfectly that love doesn't replace love. It simply adds up and expands the heart. That night, the eve of Ethan leaving for college in another city, the 3 went up to the roof deck. The tradition had remained sacred. Every Friday, when the weather allowed and the sky was clear, they went up to watch the stars. Ethan carried the telescope James had bought him years ago. Now it looked used, with marks from so much handling and night adventures. "There," Ethan pointed his finger toward the firmament. "Andromeda, 2.5 million light-years from here." "It looks like it's close by when you say it like that," Grace commented, amazed. "It's all a matter of perspective." They stayed in silence for a long time, the kind of comfortable, safe silence that only a real family manages to share without awkwardness. "Are you guys going to be okay without me?" Ethan asked, voice lower, letting his vulnerability show. James placed his firm hand on his son's shoulder. "We're going to miss you like hell, but we'll be okay. You're ready to fly. And you come back every weekend the first few months," Grace added with a motherly smile, "until you get used to your new life." "Or until you guys get used to being alone," Ethan countered, smiling slyly. "That too." Ethan looked at the sky again, at the stars he had loved his whole life. "Thank you for everything, for letting me be who I am, for building all this for me." "We built it together," James corrected gently. "Yeah, we built it." Grace took both their hands. James squeezed hers back. Ethan completed the family circle. 3 people who cruel destiny hadn't planned to bring together, but who conscious choice had united indissolubly. 3 people who had learned the hard way that family isn't about the blood you share. It's about who stays by your side when the whole world falls apart. About who chooses to love bravely, even when it's hard to do so. "That one over there," Ethan said suddenly, pointing toward a particularly bright star on the horizon. "It's new. It wasn't here before, I'm sure." "Are you sure?" James asked, squinting. "Absolutely. It's like a new beginning." Grace looked toward the tiny light traveling light years of infinite darkness just to reach her eyes, and she thought about how that was exactly what they were. Light that had traveled bravely through pain, unbearable loss, deep loneliness. But that had arrived at its destination. That had found its way. That had become a home. Inside the house, on the main wall of the living room, there was a framed photo. The 3 of them on the terrace, Ethan in the middle, smiling radiantly at the camera. Grace on one side, James on the other, all hugged tight. Taken 2 years ago, on a starry night like this one. It was the photo any visitor saw upon entering for the first time. The irrefutable proof that they existed, that they had chosen to be a family against all odds. And on nights when the house stayed empty and silent, when Ethan was far away at college and Grace and James ate dinner alone by candlelight, they looked at that photo and smiled with peace, because they knew it in the depths of their souls. That love doesn't need to be perfect to be real and eternal. It just needs to be chosen freely, every day, again and again, without fail, until it becomes finally a home.